Greetings, viewing audience. Thank you for joining us on another podcast of Chomp Talk. We are here at Brazosport College. I'm Vince Solis, proud president of this amazing institution. In our podcast this year, what we're going to be doing is something a little bit different. We usually talk about things that are happening on campus. We are expanding the breadth and scope of the podcast, and this year's topic is going to be leadership. And we are going to bring in renowned experts that have these qualities, these experiences in this field of leadership that we really want to bring to the campus and to our viewing audience. And today we've got a really exciting show for you. Our first 2026 guest is none other than our very dear friend, Captain Tom Chaby from the U.S. Navy. A little bit about his background. He was a U.S. Navy SEAL for 26 years. So the federal government invested lots of resources in his development as an officer within that elite organization. He has expertise in many, many different things, but leadership being one of those. He was also the commanding officer for SEAL Team 5, so we are extremely excited to have him not only on this podcast, but Tom has been a friend to the college for last year and a half, Tom, that you've been working with us on different things. So
Exactly.
we're excited to have you back to campus. It's always good to connect with you and hear from you, and welcome back to South Texas, Tom.
Thanks for having me. I love it here.
You flew in from Florida this morning.
Tampa to Houston.
Tampa to Houston. Quick flight.
Landed at 8 a.m., got my car and drove down.
Made it back to campus. That's awesome. Well, we hope that by this point you feel like BC is your home away from home while you're in Texas, and we're glad that you have this opportunity to speak in Houston later on tonight about leadership and many other things. But while you were in the area, we said, hey, let's get him on our podcast and let's talk about leadership and kick off 2026 on this really important theme. So I'm going to dive right in, Tom, and I got a question for you. With your very storied background and all the things that you've learned and done and this amazing career that you've had in serving our country, how do you define this really important topic of leadership? If, from your frame of mind, your framework, the experiences that you've had, how do you quantify what the definition is?
I think it might be easier to start with how I don't define it. And in my opinion, I think American culture has warped what true leadership is. And they characterize it as some anointed person, character who lords over their people,
Right.
sets conditions, standards, holds people accountable. And all those things are part of leadership. But more fundamentally than that, leadership, from my perspective, is anybody on the team that through their actions, through their words, through their responses, is able to influence and make a difference on the behaviors and actions, and hopefully with the outcomes that that unit, that team, that organization is trying to achieve. So it's very fundamental, and I think everybody's a leader, and whether you acknowledge that or not, your actions are going to influence other people. And I believe it's much more effective to just deliberately accept the responsibility of being a leader, whether you're the newest person on the team or you're the commanding officer like I was of SEAL Team 5. And that's no more important than that newest member on the team. We're all equally invested in what we're trying to achieve. Strategically, yes, we have different roles, but we all have a role. Everybody we walked by coming from your office down to the studio here, they were all leaders. I know you think that.
Absolutely. I think a big part of it is, whoever's on the team in whatever role, whether it's, this designated authority that we speak about, or that quiet leader that, grinds it out, makes it happen, helps us achieve our objectives. This idea that we bring as leaders in any position, clarity to complex situations, right? So I think that that's a big part of that whole leadership concept of, how do you clarify the difficult pieces in the noise and make it clear so that you know what you're focused on and what you're working on as a group.
Yeah, clarity.
That clarity piece.
Complex situations, scenarios, dynamics. One thing I like to say about my teammates from the Navy in general, but in particularly the SEAL community, when people transition after being in military service and they're going to now go work in the civilian sector, they're lost in some cases because they don't think their skills from the battlefield are going to readily translate to what we need here at the school, out in town, up in Houston at the airport, wherever. And I argue that. And one of the things my teammates that I've seen are unbelievably effective at is making quality decisions with incomplete information. Like, what boss doesn't want more of that?
Sure. Yeah, you want to get in good with any boss. Who doesn't want that, right?
Right.
Absolutely. Why do you think it's so hard for people to kind of fill that gap?
And when you say fill the gap, maybe expand on that a tiny bit.
I think that if you lean in kind of concept that we just talked about, those individuals that show up, make it happen, are always there, available. Those consistent, steady eddies. They're the ones that get it done, and in a lot of instances, rise through the ranks or take on different responsibilities. What separates them from the others that don't?
I think it's social, environmental. People who, I think the saying "leaders are born" is totally bogus. Leaders are made.
That's right.
Yeah.
I agree.
And yeah, maybe they're partially made at a great institution like Brazosport Community College, but I think it comes more from your environment, your family, your friends, the activities you participated in elementary and middle and high school, jobs you had, and what you've been exposed to, what examples you've had. And that's the biggest piece of it. But then the second part is most leaders who like to lord over their teams. I mean, that's my
Yeah. The
characterization
metaphor.
of
Yeah.
like the ineffective definition of leadership in America. I think lording over people
Gets you nowhere.
it gets you nowhere.
No, it doesn't get you to the places that you really want to get.
Exactly. I think these leaders do a poor job of communicating their expectations, their values, what needs to be the priority, and organizationally what your specific role is. Like, Tom, I expect you to do this, this, and this. And I expect you to meet this standard or exceed this standard
Yeah.
and in this timeliness. And in those things, I think we do a better job than back we were younger, maybe, but there's still a ton of room for improvement.
Always.
Always.
I think that any leader, if they're not in a position where they continue to learn, to develop, to grow, to enhance all their skill sets in all the areas, I think if anybody gets to a point where they're like, well, I've got this down, I think that hubris is what ends up, there's a great book about how the mighty fall. And the premise of the book is that leaders start believing their own hype, right? So I think that the day that a leader, true leaders anyway, stop growing, stop evolving, stop understanding, stop seeking that knowledge, that information, the things that can help them make informed decisions or better decisions, I think that's when not only they stop growing, but so too do the organizations. And how many times have we seen organizations, whether it's a company or other groups, that fail miserably at something that was right in front of their faces, in terms of let's capitalize on this opportunity or let's respond to a challenge that may be in the environment. We see it over and over again. There are those that do it really, really well, and then there are those that miss the spot, right? So
Absolutely.
let me ask you this, Tom. What's up in your experience in your job that you had as a military officer in the world of elite special forces? Very different responsibility than, say, for example, some of the things that we work on. What are some hard truths that you've learned in your 26 years of doing what you did about leadership? If you could share something with a younger Tom as you started out as a fresh officer in the SEALs that now, what would you go back and share with him?
Let me correct you on one thing, just so
Yeah.
we're crystal accurate on this podcast. Special Forces is a unit in the Army, and they're the counterparts of the U.S. Navy SEALs, the Rangers. Special Operations is the umbrella term.
Gotcha.
And you're in good company, by the way, because I had to do this same correction to Bill Gates. And as I was doing it,
Yeah.
it was phenomenal. I'm like, I am correcting the wealthiest man on the planet Earth right now. That's what was going on through my head. But some hard truths. I It's not about you.
Yeah.
That's absolutely young Tom Chaby was always so concerned about how we looked. It's not about me. Quit taking it per Q-tip. Quit taking it personally. It's true.
Yeah.
It's a great little mnemonic device to help remember
Hmm.
your job is the team. Your job is the mission as a leader. And your job is to help influence, set standards, motivate. And sometimes that requires you to moonwalk out of the conversation and have somebody else come in, take over because they're a better platform. Other times you're the answer and you have to be nimble enough to know when you're the answer and when you're not. And as a young leader, I thought I was supposed to do everything. I micromanaged.
Yeah.
I would redo people's work. I'm embarrassed to think back on it.
Yeah.
I really
We
am.
all take our
Yeah.
leadership lumps. But
Yeah.
you said something about the not taking it personally. There's a great book on the four truths to happiness. And one of them, the most important, but also the hardest to do, is if you can get past taking things personally, you can grow tremendously as a human being and not only grow, but find that sense of peace and happiness that people seek and really want to find. How do you work through someone who it may be a team member, maybe an employee, maybe somebody that you're coaching? How do you work through them on that item, not taking it personally? Because it's the hardest. It's one of the hardest ones to do, right? Because people are human beings, and we have natural reactions to either criticisms or things that may not be going our way, or a failure that we may have encountered, or a misstep. How do you get folks to focus on the things that are most important and not taking it?
I think you need to change how they think. And you and I have had this
Yeah.
conversation before. I think about it. Earlier in my life, it amazed me that we did not teach young men and young women financial literacy. But now I think we do a better job of that now. I have two sons who are in high school at this point, and they learned about compound interest and the risks of having a credit card. But I'm amazed that we don't teach people how to think. How to think. And most people that struggle with taking things personally, they fall victim to one of the cultural traps that we have in American, and I bleed red, white, and blue.
Yeah.
I do.
Of course.
But I believe the culture is the enemy. We think in outcomes.
And
Like,
we've talked a lot
yeah,
about that.
where'd you
Yeah.
go to school? What kind of car do you drive? What do you want to do when you go in the Navy? Nathan's sitting over on the side, it's like outcome, outcome, outcome. And, the social media, which is horrible.
You and I agree on that too.
And I when you learn, yeah, it's all about the outcome. That's why we're here today. We want to get a great podcast that makes a difference for the viewing audience and helps elevate Brazosport. That's great, the outcome. But the only way we're going to get there is by staying disciplined to the process that you and I agree to today. The questions, the approach, and that's where we are right now. We're not thinking great outcome, great outcome. We're thinking, no, answer this question effectively right now. And when you're so worried about how you look, what people think of you, I want to get the promotion, I want to be the commanding officer. Like I swear to you, I never thought I want to be a commanding officer. I just executed being an effective. I wanted to be a leader.
Which is interesting because I found, at least in my career, the folks that are in that bucket of where like I want to get to that usually don't get to that, whatever it is that they're seeking.
Agree.
And the folks that are like, that's not on my list, it's not on my agenda, but this being good at this, and you talk about this a lot of time in terms of the outcome versus the process, right? The focus on, and I like the analogy that you've used when you and I have talked about this, about the baseball player whose focus is the outcome that he wants or she wants, they're playing softball. They want to hit that home run. And then the question becomes, well, how many times have you gone to the batting cages to practice? Have you done those cuts hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times so that that one moment that you have to make it happen, you're prepared? So it's about the work that you put in prior to getting to that outcome. But, can you expand a little bit more about our obsession with the outcome versus putting in the work in the process?
Well, sticking with the baseball batter analogy, metaphor, if you're at bat and all you're going to focus on is hitting a home run or getting a hit, what's going to happen to you when you have a strike? And I'll call that one pitch, that one strike, a micro outcome.
Yeah.
How you handle that micro outcome is going to influence the next micro outcome. And if yeah, the goal is to get a hit or hit a home run. But it's a paradox. The more you focus on getting a hit, hitting a home run, the less likely it'll happen. But when you're able to focus on the process, okay, why did I strike out? Oh, I was too far back in the box and he threw a slower pitch and my swing was too early. And you're able to not get caught up with the burden of an outcome that's going to make you feel bad. That's going to send you into this spiral where then you're going to go into a slump. Like slumps don't just magically happen. Like you caught a slump. No, they come from how you think, and nobody taught us how to think. So you're already behind the eight ball.
And there's also those internal conversations that we are having with ourselves. And I'm a big believer. People will sometimes catch me talking to myself, and I tell them, I said, it just depends on the conversation that you're having with yourself, right? Because there are some internal conversations that can be very negative and bad for you. And then there are others that offer that clarity. What did I do? What could have I done differently? But let's go back and revisit the process. To your point of the micro outcome, if you go back and examine each of those pieces, in athletes, you find, obviously there are some individuals that are born with tremendous talents and gifts, but really the hardest working ones, the ones that are committed to the process, the ones that show up before, leave the latest, spend their free time studying, becoming true students and masters of what their craft is, are the ones that really excel. And we've talked a little bit about that. You've used some other great sports analogies about they may not be the greatest athlete, but they were the greatest at what they did because of the commitment they had to their craft.
Absolutely. And that would fall in the discipline category. But before we get into that, I want to back up a little bit. I'm working with an elite Division I college baseball team right now. I'm on week 2 working with them. And I went to the campus a month ago for my first visit, and now we're doing things remotely. And I asked the coach, he had a player on his team last season who he was money. Like whatever the coach needed, this young man would go to the plate and produce. It was uncanny. And I asked him, I go, what gives? Is he just that phenomenal? And he goes, he's a great ball player. But then he added, he goes, but he's dumb as a box of rocks. And I keep thinking about this comment. And when you're super thoughtful, you're just thinking, okay, what do I need to do? What do I like? You're creating all this chatter in your brain. When you're dumb as a box of rocks, you're just
There's
up there.
clarity.
I'm just going to go get a hit. I'm just going to get a hit, and you're not burdened by all this analysis, paralysis by analysis.
Yeah.
And that's an element of thinking more effectively. Like, yeah, like it's great to analyze what's happening, but the time to analyze is later, not when you're at the
Right.
plate
It's
and you got
after.
a
That's
93
right.
mile an hour fastball coming. That's
Got to
when you
make it
need to be
happen.
quiet the brain, and you got to have this different kind of mindset, and you need to have a process to effectively
You know,
win the day.
talk about with the quiet in the brain, and I think that it's also really difficult to do in today's modern world when we're constantly on and we have access to not just information in the pockets of our in our pockets with our cell phones and the access to information, but there's a lot of tools to distract us, right? A lot of tools that people spend a lot of time on that don't really get you to where you want to be and really are counterpoints to what you're trying to accomplish. How do you, going back to this piece on the discipline, how do you help instill within team members or within, members of an organization, how do you get them to work through that discipline piece? Because staying focused over a long period of time, it's not easy. I mean, I think that the folks that struggle with those pieces have challenges in other areas.
Well, learning how to think more effectively.
Yeah, big piece.
It's a skill. And there are 5 strategies that I subscribe to. I didn't make these up. I didn't go find them though on the back of a cereal box or in some how-to book. But I assembled them through research, through working with elite athletes, working with leaders like Bill Gates, who I had the opportunity to spend some time with, working with other leaders like yourself, and learning what worked, what didn't. And the five strategies, just real quick, I won't get too deeply into them. The first one is be a disciplined thinker. What does that mean? Well, don't think stupid SHIT. Like, control what you can control. Like, people think and focus and waste energy on things they have no control over.
That's it.
Like I don't know why they're thinking that.
I'd say most of the conversation in someone's internal thoughts is that focused on things. I often tell people, look, you're focused on some person or some. A lot of times, you're not even on their radar. People, they're busy with their own life. They're busy with their own things. No one's out there going home thinking about Tom and Vince and well, what are they doing? What do they have to? Who's got time for that? And to your point, those internal conversations, a lot of times nobody else is having them but you. You know, no one cares. Like everybody's got their own stuff going.
I had a recent episode. A friend of mine connected me with a coach from London, and he's like a juggernaut in the coaching elite sports world. And I was excited. I knew him by his reputation. I've read a couple of his books, and he was eager to talk to me. At least that's what my friend told me. We were all set. 10 o'clock Tuesday morning, Zoom call, time difference. I think it was 6 hours, London to Eastern time. I'm up, got my Zoom call going, and he doesn't show up. 20 minutes later, not there. Hour later, crickets. I sent him an email. Hey, maybe I got the time zone wrong. Nothing, no response. So I'm like, wow. What did he hear something about me? And now
Did he see
BC's
podcast?
Yeah,
or what's
wants
he
no
up to?
part
Yeah.
of collaborating with me. And 2 days go by, nothing. A week goes by, nothing. On day 8, I get a call from the gentleman that connected us, my friend, who was friends with this other coach from England as well. And he's like, Tom, Joe just called me. He is so embarrassed. He's despondent. His father passed away. He's from an island in the north of the United Kingdom, and they had no internet connection, and there was no way he could get in touch with you. He's beside himself. He said, give him 3 windows, and he'll make himself available for all 3. And we'll talk. And that whole time I was going through that internal dialogue back and forth, I kept saying, don't think stupid SHIT. Don't think stupid. I go, like who knows what's going on? And I invested very little energy in what happened. And it turned out I was right to not do that. So, that's an example. Another example is going automatic. I don't want to get into bits of information, but, the science of how we can consciously think. Like you and I speaking right now, this takes approximately, according to experts, 120 bits of information per second to consciously process. But unconsciously, we could process significantly more than, like, have you ever driven from point A to point B and you don't remember driving? And you're like, did I go through a red light? Did I hit a cat? Like, you can't even remember driving. And it happens all the time. And you probably drove unbelievably well. And the more things you can make automatic where you don't have to consciously think about it, then you can get into the zone. Then you can be more intuition. Intuition comes from having the ability to process things you don't even know you're processing. Nonverbal communication is a great example.
Most communication happens through that nonverbal message and
I
processing.
think it's like over 85%, over 90%.
Closer to 90%.
Yeah.
So that disciplined thinking, and then there were some other strategies to use. What are some of the other things?
So the first one, disciplined thinking. The second one, go automatic. You have a skill. If you do something, train it. And a friend of mine recently met Mike Schmidt. I don't know if you know who he is. He's a Hall of Fame third baseman from back in the 80s and 90s, played for the Phillies. And my friend, who does what I do for a living, asked him, Mike, what is the difference between you and other great athletes that maybe even had more athletic skill than you do?
What did he say to something like what was it?
His answer was DBW. It's like, DBW? My buddy goes, what the heck is DBW? And he goes, folks that succeed in a sport like baseball that's highly skill oriented leadership, I'll argue, is highly skill oriented. In baseball, DBW is doing boring well. He said he would throw a ball against the wall for hours, hundreds, thousands. He didn't have to think when a ball comes down the third baseline where he played third base, 110 miles an hour. He just fielded it. And he was able to do that. Leaders that have gone through and visualized different leadership scenarios, leaders that have taken the time to learn and challenge themselves. And I didn't say this before, but I want to say it now. They were humble and willing to be vulnerable. Like Dr. Solis, I'd love for you after this call, after this podcast, for you to share with me how you think I could become more effective and engaging on a one-on-one conversation. Like that's vulnerability. And those two things are where growth happens.
You have to, because if you're not and I think self-awareness is also one of these skills that people need to develop, because if you don't have the ability to be self-aware, we miss so much of the things that are important. We miss the cues, we miss the opportunities, we miss the connections. There's so much that goes by the wayside with and I see this a lot, people's lack of self-awareness. It's mind-boggling that there are folks that will go through their lives without thinking about how they impacted someone. And how you do that can be for the good or for the bad. I think that if you take the time to really have a vested interest in the people that you interact with daily, how are you? What's going on? How can we help? Are you doing okay? And really mean it. You'll get along in terms of building those relationships with the people on your teams. But if you're just so focused and you're not self-aware of what's going on around you, and that there may be somebody in distress or someone that's having a celebratory moment or whatever the case may be, you're going to miss those opportunities to really develop those relationships.
And that goes back to the definition of leadership right there. That's the core of it.
A lot of things that are difficult, but there are some things that are fundamental, that are the
non-negotiable.
basics, non-negotiable.
Yeah.
You got to do them.
Like there are folks, teammates of mine, that I was the anointed leader, the appointed leader, commanding officer of their performance. And to be frank, I didn't like them.
Why? Tell me why you didn't.
The values they had in their life were different than my values. I wouldn't go bowling with them. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But they were fantastic operators. I couldn't just eliminate them because I had different values in them.
Of course not.
And for the most part, they were decent people. And I'm not being judgmental. They were just different. They had different priorities, perhaps. And being willing to realize, being self-aware, like you said, I think spot on, and understanding my role isn't to be their friend. And that was an early discovery. Like that was a hurdle for me. When I finally, one of my mentors pulled me aside, he goes, "You're not their friend. You can be friendly with them, but your job's not to be their friend. Your job is to be their leader, and you're going to have to say some hard things."
You also, when you and I first started having our conversations, I remember you telling me, goes, as an executive coach, I'm going to tell you things that you need to hear, not what you want to hear, right? Because you deal with, CEOs and people that are in positions, and I really appreciated that, because if you're going to grow, sometimes you need to hear things that are going to make you feel uncomfortable, right? Because if you're looking for that gap between what you possess as a skill now and what you need to have to do a better job in leading, you have to hear those conversations, and you have to be receptive, and you have to be humble enough to understand, you know what, that's a really good point. And you have to reflect on the conversations, because if not, why go through the process?
Yet the majority of people are resistant.
I would say most of them.
Or they pretend to be accepting, and it's a facade.
Yeah, there'll be a yeah, and then they just walk out the door, and
That's right.
Yeah. And I think it's unfortunate, because at the end, they end up missing out, but so do their team. Their teams miss out. Let me ask you this: is there a difference, and if there is, what is it, between leading, obviously in the field that you are in, you're leading these extremely competent, really smart problem solvers that are driven very differently, right? Not just anybody gets into these units. Is there a difference in leading that group, and that there is someone that maybe, obviously, here at the campus, we're not Navy SEALs or anything like that. You have a different working group. They're all highly motivated. They've all accomplished and overcome. Is there a difference in leadership?
I say no. I think a team is a team is a team.
Yeah.
Human dynamics are consistent, regardless of what outcomes you're trying to achieve, what environment you work in, what you are working together, collaborating, and it's just human dynamics are the same. Sure, the pressure could be higher, life or death.
Life
Okay,
or
that
death.
changes things.
You know, talking about human dynamics, where have you seen, Tom, where leaders fail or in a deeper sense lose the trust of their team? And if you've seen that or experienced that, how do you regain the trust of team members when, because we're all human, right? We're going to have our moments of failure or opportunities where we could have done things differently or better. How do you manage or navigate that from a leadership perspective?
I think it matters what the failure stemmed from.
Right.
Was it maliciousness, malfeasance? That's
Very different.
unrecoverable.
Yeah. Can't do it.
Was it hubris, arrogance? I think that's unrecoverable.
It's hard to get
Was
back.
it a sincere, honest? You were collaborating with your teammates. You had a plan, and you gave your folks an opportunity to, hey, I've got some thoughts on that. I don't agree with X or Y or Z, and you went through a process and it just didn't work out. That's a completely different thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, completely different thing. So I think it's hard to recover from leadership mistakes when there's lack of humility and lack of vulnerability in the process leading up to that mistake. And let me be clear, like being humble and being vulnerable, people hear those words, and a lot there are elite sport coaches I work with that look at those words as weakness, and they couldn't be more inaccurate. Their strength. Yeah, the athlete, the leader, the teammate that's willing to be vulnerable, truly vulnerable, and expose their warts in a
That's how you grow.
constructive way, that's strength.
It's how you grow, and it's also how you build trust.
It is.
Yeah.
Like I frankly, I started doing it to effect. I would start we do a thing called a hot wash. And that's where we'll sit at a big table after an operation. We're on the battlefield, just in a gun battle, whatever. We had a mission. There's never a flawless mission. I started, hey, I'm going to go first. And even if I couldn't think of something that I did that was less than ideal, I would, I didn't lie, but I would find something. I could have passed the strategic guidance earlier so the team would have had more opportunity to prepare. I could have been clearer on my guidance. I made the call late when we were waiting for the medevac or the quick reaction force or the call for fire. I put us in jeopardy. Whatever. I would open it up as the leader, the commanding officer. And when I was in Iraq, I was a task force commander. 500 men and women were appointed to me to be a leader. And we were thousands of operations going on. It was a bodacious responsibility. It was the pinnacle of what I wanted. I loved every minute of it, but it was brutal. But going through all these after action reports, these hot washes, like we call them, I would have to do that to open up the aperture and give them permission to be vulnerable. I learned that. And like, hey, I'm not perfect. I made these mistakes. And sometimes they were not fabricated. They were real and they weren't malicious, but they were daunting. And then other people, what I learned, the more, real I was with that, the willingness to turn the light back on myself, the higher the level of trust went with my team. It was
Absolutely.
directly connected,
They go hand in
100%.
hand.
Yeah.
That's the way. Let me ask you this: when you're dealing with these, to your, script or their life and death situations, or where there's a lot riding on it beyond the, you know, normal things that we deal with in an office setting. In your work, how do you deal with someone whose morale may be low? if you're in the constant grind, or there's just these ebbs and flows of these busy periods, or a lot of pressure built on based on how do you keep someone's morale up?
Well, you said self-awareness earlier. I was an aide de camp, and that is an aide where you follow a senior military officer around. And I was the aide de camp for the commanding officer of Special Operations Command. What we talked about
Yeah.
earlier, the difference between special operations and special forces. And his leadership scope, 73,000 people fell under. Any given day, he had people in 80 plus countries. Any given morning, somebody perished the night before, maybe in training, maybe in combat. And any given quarter, he was preparing to testify to Congress. His life was unbelievable, and I ran his life. That was my job. So at the end of it, I found out and it was kind of a kingmaker job. I screened to be commanding officer, and I'm getting ready to go to SEAL Team 5, and I asked General Brian Douglas Brown, Army General, TF-160, the first commanding officer. They are the premier helicopter squadron in the U.S. military. Just unbelievable how effective they are. I asked him for guidance, and he looked at me. He said, "Find yourself a senior enlisted advisor, and that's your right-hand man, who will tell you the deal. He'll speak candidly. He won't sugarcoat things." And then the second thing he said is, "Know your people." And then he paused. He goes, "No, no, no. Know your people." So I took that to heart. I met every person at Team 5. It took me months, and I gave
How
them
many total people were that? Was it
at the
500?
time then it was 300, and then it would grow to 500 when we deployed, and I met with all of them as well. And I gave them a list of 10 questions. If you were king for the day, what would you change? You know,
What was the most surprising response that you got to those questions?
I still have the notebook with all the answers, and the most surprising, the most surprising thing that I remember hearing was the reality that no other leader had given him the opportunity to share like that. And yeah, I'm not saying that like, look at me, look at me. I was kind of, because I had never done it before. It took a 4-star recommending it to me to do it. And that was kind of shocking when you think about it, like knowing your people. So when, let's go all the way back to where this question started. When somebody's lost motivation, if you don't know their background, if you don't know about their family, if you like how are you going to be empathetic? How are you going to even be able to have an honest conversation with them where they'll feel comfortable enough to reveal their vulnerabilities? And hey, I'm here to help you. I get it. You got some private stuff going on, but I want you to know if I'm not the answer, somebody else is. Let me know. I've got some WASTA. WASTA is street cred. I could get you somebody to help you with whatever you need. And
And being sincere in that moment, right?
being sincere in that moment, because it's a people thing.
It is, yeah.
That's what leadership.
It's all
Yeah,
about the people.
it's not about position, a parking spot.
It's not.
I hated having a parking spot. I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes it was great when it was cold out or whatever. But
Yeah.
no, I hated privilege. I just
Yeah,
not a
there's
fan.
big pieces that come with the whole leadership. And let me ask you this: I mean, you're working with these 500 people, and obviously the scope of the responsibility, the weight of your decisions. What do you think is the biggest, or the biggest decision you made that had the biggest impact? What was a decision you made that said, "Man, that really made a difference in your team, or a mission, or something you were working on?"
Yeah, we had a young man, and maybe he'll listen to this, and I think the world of this guy. I'll leave him nameless. Silver Star recipient, which is a big deal, like enormous deal. Heroism on the battlefield, like the stories are like wow, movie. You can make a movie out of what he did. He came to my team, and I knew him previously, and as a leader, and there was a gap. The leadership position below him and above him were vacant. this Silver Star recipient. He was a superstar. And a couple months would go by and there were some rumblings, there were some challenges with his unit. 6 months would go by, and eventually we would get to a point where it was so disruptive that we may need to make a change. And the challenge was for me was I should have been more proactive. I should have not allowed those vacancies in those positions above and below him to remain vacant for as long as we did. They were filled by the time we got to this point. But it came to the point where we had to consider removing him from the team. And
So let
this
me
is
ask you a
a
question.
superstar.
So what happens in between the time that you're made aware of a situation and the time that you're acting? Because if you're getting to the point where like, hey, we may need to make some changes here, what's happened in between step one to
Well,
that?
what happens and what should have happened are two different things
Right.
in this case. What should have happened was he should have immediately been counseled unemotionally.
Right.
Yeah, no, this is all functional. This is all about effectiveness. And it should have happened earlier. Like like I was 8 months behind the power curve. And I'm not the only one that was at fault here. There was another layer of leadership between me and this young man. Not passing
Right.
blame
No.
at
Sure.
all, but I take the hit. But we it became so disruptive. Their unit was out of the three. We're split into thirds with three. They're called troops, three troops, and their troop was suffering horribly, and so much so it was affecting the entire team. So we ultimately, with the senior enlisted advisor that I mentioned, the general told me find that guy. He and I both admitted that we failed. Should have been more proactive, but we gave him a chance, and it was too late. I think if we would have been more candid and aggressively pursuing the truth earlier, he could have survived, but it was too late. We were deploying a couple months out, and we had to replace him, and it was brutal. Yeah,
So Tom, let me ask this. And this is kind of the crucible that comes with leadership. There's a lot of things that, that come with it that are good, pros, but there are some things that are challenges and cons for the individual. And we all experience this. So you go through this difficult situation, you have to make this call. And how do you manage yourself after as a leader? You've made a difficult decision. You recognize in the discussion that we're having that there were some things that could have been done differently. How do you, as a leader, not lose focus after you've gone through that? So we covered the piece that deals with how you work through the situation with the young man, but what from a leadership perspective, how did you work through the pieces of the after action report in your head? The I could have done this differently. At a time that you're about to deploy and you got all these other responsibilities, how do you tackle that?
well, you have to stay focused on the process, and it's not about me. Yet it's all about me, and I need to capture that lesson learned. Which, believe me, there's no not capturing that lesson, and it's indelibly etched in the back of my brain. And you have to move forward because it's about the team, it's about the mission, and frankly, you have to observe and be aware. Because who knew? Was this going to be the right decision? It could be completely disruptive where more dominoes fall and things could get even worse. Yet the exact opposite happened. Probably it being the most difficult decision in my career was probably the most effective decision I made as well because that troop went from being the worst by far, leapfrogged over the other two, and became the best by far in a matter of a couple months.
And it's amazing because you made some changes in the personnel that you had to, but to the point that you and I have talked about, one person on a team, whether it's in that role or in another, one person can make all the difference in terms of how the team interacts, what they can accomplish, how the dynamics interplay with one another. But yeah, I think that piece. Let me kind of dovetail
Let
the
me add
question.
one thing now,
Yeah,
and less is often more.
yeah,
Like they had less people.
yeah. Yeah, you
And
deal with
and
a lot, yeah,
and
less of
they became
everything.
more robust, more effective. Like, and that's, once again, it's paradoxical. Um, I really do believe less is more.
Yeah.
Very often when you're having disruption to that extent.
Yeah, and to your point, Tom, you talked about this piece of this decision that you made that had the biggest impact, but there's also the accountability factor, right? Accountability within ourselves as leaders and also holding this individual accountable. What do you think leaders get wrong about accountability and how they use that as a tool to be effective or ineffective in their roles as leaders?
I think in America, leaders are too emotional
Very.
with accountability. Accountability drives performance. No two ways
You-
about it. But being like there's, in my opinion, yeah, yeah, be motivated. That's great. Be frustrated. That's fine. But it's not a function of either of those things when you're holding somebody accountable. It's purely, are they espousing our shared values? Are they? If they're not, that's a problem. Are they meeting or exceeding our expectations? If they are, fantastic. If they're not, that's a problem. It's black and white.
You said something to me once, Tom, when we first started developing our relationship in terms of understanding leadership at higher levels. And you said, and I'll never forget this, you said, we were talking about accountability. We were kind of having a similar discussion. And you said to me, Vince, accountability is a gift that you give to yourself and to your team.
Yeah.
Can you kind of talk a little bit, because that stuck with me, because I think the true words can't be spoken. The leader is responsible for where the team is headed and what they are doing, and there are a lot of elements that come into that. But that accountability piece, in terms of, and it's all how you frame that discussion, right? Even if it's an internal discussion, that accountability piece. I remember it vividly. We were sitting down, and you said this just as clear as day. You said, "Hey, accountability is a gift that you give yourself and to the team."
Absolutely. And if you're not comfortable holding people accountable
Yeah,
and communicating that in a candid way, like, get out of the way.
yeah.
I mean,
That's it.
that is your role.
You're in the wrong spot.
Yeah,
That's right.
and like, I have two sons who play baseball, and they're very different. And baseball's a hard sport. It's just, it's skill oriented. And, we talked a little bit about it already. And one of my sons, he does boring well, like Mike Schmidt, like unbelievable, working, making things automatic. He goes to tryouts, and he's freaky how effective he is. And my other son is physically very gifted, but he doesn't do that. It's almost like he has the physical gift, so he takes that other piece of the discipline and development for granted. And like, I just like it was hard for me because I
Yeah,
love my sons,
sure.
but I my job was, I'm kind of their manager in a
Yeah.
sense. Like, baseball's brutal. They got travel, high
Oh, yeah.
school, the
Yeah,
whole, they're
nonstop.
going all over the place. And I'm just like, hey, to my son, I talked to him, and I shared with him exactly that. And he was like, thank you. And he changed. He modified his behavior, and now he's different,
What's it
which is
like
phenomenal.
what's it like for your sons when dad is, we talked about this kind of GI Joe, right? So you've got all this experience, and you were a SEAL for 26 years, and but to them you're dad. So
Yeah.
what's that like, coaching, spending time with them? What's that like? What's different
Yeah,
about leadership in that space?
they're like every other son with their father, like, they don't want to listen to me.
Yeah.
But the difference is, like, they get to go with me when I work with sports teams. And I can remember we're with the Tampa Bay Lightning, and I was with them for a bunch of years. They won 2 Stanley Cups. And, one of their star players, my sons wanted to meet him. And, I'm like, "Hey, come on over." And the star player looked at my sons and goes, "You guys need to listen to your dad." Like, and they're, like, all confused. They don't know what to
They're like,
do.
"Why? He's just our
Yeah,
dad."
like, "He's
Yeah.
my dad. I don't wanna
Yeah.
listen to him." But, I think human dynamics are human dynamics. People, it amazes me how resistant people are. We're not, like, I'll talk about neutral thinking. Like, neutral thinking, that's one of the
We did.
strategies. I
Yeah.
didn't get to it. And it's the fifth strategy. And neutral thinking is how you respond to things. Like, okay, yeah, you could be all positive about being a positive thinker in the middle of a performance is an ineffective way to think. It's ineffective
Different kind of
because
pressure.
you're going to have the burden of that positivity on your shoulder, and that potentially could send you into fight or flight. And there's a whole slew of other things it could do. But being neutral, which like, oh, be a neutral thinker. Like intellectually, you understand what that means. I know what the word neutral means. I know what the word thinking means. Yeah, I'm going to go do some neutral thinking. No, you're not going to do anything. You can't do that when it matters most. It takes, frankly, years.
It's a skill that you
It's a
develop.
skill, and it's frankly very difficult to be neutral when something life or death is about to happen to you, or something when you really, 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 really want a specific outcome. When you
It's
really
hard to be
want it,
neutral.
yeah, and then, oh no, I'm not going to get it. I'm not going to get it. I'm not going to get it.
Y-
That you're thinking the wrong way. Just be neutral. What do I need? I need to execute the process.
I often tell folks, Tom, unfortunately, we don't live in a neutral world, right? Everything that you come across with your social media, your news, it's all tilted in one direction or another. That neutrality is almost something that you have to seek. You have to have a purposeful map by which you deliberately seek that neutrality. In the morning, I will listen to the left. In the evening, I will listen to the right. And every single day, I am amazed at how different the discussions are about the same thing, right? And for me, what's important is to make a concerted effort to seek as many facts and details about things that are important to me. Because if you just listen to these echo chambers, there is no opportunity for neutrality. And that happens in leadership. It happens in what we get as information. There's just no capacity in that space because you're not getting it to begin with. And you're in this echo chamber of things that either you want to hear or you're invested in heavily or you want an outcome to happen really bad. I was talking to a friend of mine who retired recently, and I laughed because I could hear his wife in the background, and his wife's name is Sandy. I said, Sandy, how's he doing? And he said, well, ever since he's retired, he's become a grumpy old man, because he spends his day watching the news and he gets upset, and because there's no neutrality in there, right? And if there's no neutrality, you go down these rabbit holes that make you uh, ineffective in your thinking.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by the lack of neutrality, and I don't. I mean, I understand why it drives dollars,
Sure, of
and and
course,
and
if
they're-
you
and,
can,
and, they're, and
yeah,
like CNN
that's it,
versus
all of
Fox,
them.
they're both trying to make money with different demographics, and I'm like you, like I'll watch PBS,
Yeah.
I'll watch Fox, I'll watch CNN. I have a hard time with a couple of the other channels, but
Yeah.
um, and I marvel at how different they are. But the more interesting thing for me is like last night I flew back from Detroit. I do a bunch of work up in Michigan basketball, and I'm sitting next to this young lady who's a professor in Michigan, and she's clearly of one political leaning, and she and I were different. Yet we talked about almost every issue on the 2.5 hour flight. And if we were more than 1 degree separated on everything, I'd be surprised.
That's what I tell folks. When people get into these echo chambers, I tell them, look, when you go to the grocery store and you're living your life, everybody that's in there, you're saying, hello, how are you? What's going on? Everybody's doing their thing. You don't see these extreme leanings one way or the other, right? In the normal data, just like we do on campus, at an organization, where people are just trying to kind of work through their things. But the minute that you hop onto social media platforms or onto news channels or onto the system is designed to wind you up one way or the other. And I think that, going back to this whole concept of the neutral thinking, it's a skill that I think is needed now more than ever, not just in leadership, I think just to balance life out because there's so much noise. And how do you sift through it if you are already inclined to view it one way or the other?
Right. And the leaders that approve the programmatics that we're exposed to,
Yeah,
they're complicit and they're
I agree.
delinquent and they're not leaders.
Yeah.
They're manipulators. And that to me is borderline criminal.
And it's also to your point, it's about making money, right?
Yeah.
So I have a question that dovetails into that as well, Tom. So we talk about integrity as, being important to leadership. And there's some fundamental things that are non-negotiable. Talk to me about integrity in leadership.
integrity, meeting expectations or exceeding them. It's not being deceptive. It's being willing to be vulnerable. It's being able and willing and readily doing it to put a mirror on your performance and listen and be willing to do a 360 anonymous, listen to what people have to say. Um, Sometimes those things get disruptive as well, but that's
They do. Yeah.
um
I've seen both sides to those. So,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I,
So
I will tell you that I think as a leadership skill, it helps the individual. I've seen if they're willing to actually take the information that's in there, but they can get very disruptive, right? So you got to have a plan for both those pieces.
right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, 'cause some people they're going to get personal.
Sure.
And, it's
It
anonymous. I can
comes with
say
it.
what,
It
and
comes with it.
that's what we hate about
Yeah.
the social media world. You can see there's no accountability for the words they say.
Yeah.
There should be.
Yeah. There is none. And it's
Yeah.
easy to be a keyboard warrior and it's easy to sit behind and criticize everything. And yeah, it's amazing how often these conversations come up. And so much of it is, you and I had this conversation as well about the integrity is that this is the foundation. This is a foundation that can't be or should not be shaken because when it is, it leads to other consequences within the group. Other things happen that may not be good for the organization or good for the individual. I can't tell you how many times that I've seen in my career where people, smart, hardworking, dedicated, committed, have worked all their lives to get to wherever it is that their goal has been, and they throw it all out the window because that rock that's supposed to be built on that integrity, that foundation, that base has cracks and fissures in it. And
Yep.
it doesn't stand up to the test of hubris. It doesn't stand up to the test of temptation. Leadership comes with a lot of temptation. Depending on the role that you have and the position that you have to be highly hyper cognizant that there are things that will derail your every effort, everything that you've worked for. And we see this all the time. There are lots of national examples where you ask yourself, how could they have put themselves in that situation? And you see it over and over and over. And I think that bedrock of integrity, that leadership should be built as the first most fundamental thing that you can have, it's not there to begin with.
Yeah. Well, when you're the senior organizational leader, there's very little scrutiny on what you do, and human nature. I would argue you should probably set yourself up for success and have a peer
That's right. Absolutely.
or somebody to hold you accountable.
Going back to what you said when we first started our discussions about, I'm going to tell you things that you may not want to hear, but they're important for you to hear. Because if you don't keep that gauge, and I think that that's also a skill ton that people that you need to develop is you have to hold yourself accountable. We've also talked about moral courage, right? So having the courage to do the right thing. For me, what it does is when you're doing the right thing, I'm doing it because the clarity that comes with making the right decision for the organization is what gives me that, right? But you have to stay laser focused on what drives that. Because I think that moral courage, integrity, hubris, believing our own hype are the things that get people into issues. I think the other thing is, and we see this often, is when there is this lapse in leadership, and it's not a judgment; it's a complete and utter failure when someone is caught embezzling or having the office romance or not doing the things that they needed, or just any number of things that will derail leaders. You often wonder, okay, well, how did they get themselves in that position? And it boils down to fundamentally the rock isn't there. Their foundation is not there. And they know that they're doing things that they shouldn't be doing. And they know that this is going to get them into very serious issues with either their career or their families or their perception in the public. That trust goes away and people still risk it over dumb things. Why do you think that happens?
Yeah, back to human nature. I mean, we're flawed.
Yeah.
We're a flawed
The
species.
human condition is flawed. That's why I think it's so important to work on yourselves all the time. If
Yeah.
you seek the mantle of leadership, it's not just to your point of having the title and being in the role. You have to seek out and constantly build yourself to be the type of individual that you're not going to be subject to. My dad would tell me, my dad had a sixth grade education, Tom, and he would tell me, he'd give me the things, his rules every day. Every single day, my dad would, before I left to school, he would tell me, how are you doing? That's a good dad. He goes, all right. He goes, are you clean? Right. When my dad was really, he was military. He was former army guy, and he wanted to make sure that everything was. He would always say, he goes, you can be poor. He goes, and you may have patches in your pants. He goes, but you make sure you have patches in the holes in your pants. Right. He would always just these little things, but he would tell me, be good to people, and people will be good. Those were his rules. Like show up and present, be good to people. But his third thing that he would tell me, Tom, the last thing before every time I left, he says, if you take something that isn't yours, he says, you're going to find out who I am, right? And what he meant was he always called it taking something or stealing something. He said, it's the darkest stain your soul could ever have, right? And as a child, when you hear these things, it resonates, right? Because to this day, my dad has been gone for 25 years, and I am still proud that I have never taken anything because he just instilled that in me. He says, you never steal anything that isn't yours. He said, you never take anything that isn't yours. And then he'd finish off with this, biblical kind of sense of, he goes, it's the darkest stain, your soul can ever have. He was right, because there's no getting that back. There's no getting that back once you do that. So, and it also leads you down a darker path, right? So if it was easy to do this, it's easier to do something a little bit bigger. And it goes back to that moral courage and that integrity.
Your dad had rules.
He did. They were simple.
And those
3
rules are essentially processes.
Yeah.
And you could have a process to achieve an outcome. You can also have a process to avoid outcomes. And if you just leave yourself at the mercy of your own desires and you're an outcome focused person, you're probably going to have a problem eventually. And
Focus on the process.
Yeah.
But
it's
the process is
game
hard, Tom.
changing.
It's game changing, but I think that especially in today's age, people want the easy way. How do I get to there right now? Well, it's called the iceberg effect. We've talked about it. You see somebody who's successful, they're like, well, how do we get to that right now? They're like, well, getting to that station requires a lot of work, lots of commitment, lots of sacrifice. It doesn't happen overnight. So, Tom, this has been a really fascinating conversation. Next time you're on campus, we're going to have to do a part 2 to this.
I love it.
But I do want to thank you, not just for being a friend to Brazosport College, Tom, but I want to thank you for your many years of service, the type of service that you've done, your advocacy for veterans. That's really important to me. The first time I saw you speak and we were talking about some of those things, I knew that you were the right kind of guy in terms of working with the college, doing some coaching. And I'll never forget, I'm going to close with this. We were talking about the strategic plan that we'd been working on a year. And I said, Tom, Captain Chaby, we've got this document, we've completed, and we're really proud of it. And you looked at it for 2 minutes and you said, where's your accountability in it? Who's keeping you accountable as the president? Who's keeping the college accountable? I said, all right, I get it. I said, let's go back in there. So I met with the folks. I'm like, all right, I spoke with Captain Chaby. He really liked this. He goes, but we need to add these elements. And we had a lot of discussion because in academia, words mean a lot, right? So we had multiple discussions about, well, what does that mean to hold ourselves accountable to the things that we are committed to doing as an institution? So, Tom, I want to thank you for being a friend to the college and your advocacy and all the work that you do in promoting leadership. Folks, we hope that you've enjoyed this session with Captain Tom Chaby. You can find him online. And if you are in the area of Lake Jackson, Clute, or Richwood, we have him on campus regularly. So come by and visit with Captain Chaby or myself. Love to have you visit the campus. So we will see you next time, where we will continue the 2026 series on leadership development, and all things related to this important topic we call leadership. Thank you so much for supporting Brazosport College. We look forward to seeing you on the next podcast.